Good afternoon and welcome to Live at 12:05 here at the Isle of Wight County Museum. I'm Jennifer England, the director. Thank you for tuning in. Just recently, we have had the pleasure of having two equine historians visit the museum, and so we took a little bit of time to interview them. As we have a number of equine artifacts, including faunal remains and horse-related military and agricultural equipment in our collection, this topic is very relevant to Isle of Wight County's history.
It's always a pleasure to be here, and the history of Isle of Wight County is so exciting because it goes back to the roots of our English-speaking America. My lovely wife here, who's an equestrian, and I love military history. So in studying that together, we went back trying to learn the roots of equestrian history. What we've been able to find out, what we know from especially a lot of the current archaeology at Jamestown, has shown us that horses were here in the earliest days, but they were here more in an official function and in small numbers. We know from the excavations there that in 1610, at the starving time, that there were horses present because they found horse skeletal remains that were actually eaten.
First horses that came over were brought in 1609 as gentlemen's horses, the governor's horses. They were not utilitarian, they were mainly for a presence. There were 6 mares and 1 stallion brought. They did bring 17 more back in 1611, and they would continue to grow with the colony in numbers.
In the earliest days, riding horses were a status symbol. So only the wealthy and those who had titles had the riding horses in early Virginia. So you see the horses here were marks of rank and marks of status.
And the horses that were brought over were actually known as the Great Horse of England. The Great Horse looked quite different than the horses that would eventually be coming to the colonies and become the horses that would develop later on, the quarter horse, the thoroughbred breeds.
It was the Great Horse because this was still the day of knights, mounted knights on armor. And the Great Horse was developed and bred specifically to support the knight and his armor, which was a fighting machine. And we're familiar with, especially the movies, the knights with their lances and their big swords and all that weight. And the horse was actually the fighting platform that held the concussion from those contests, and also was trained to be part of the weapon, was a war horse. So the earliest days of the colonies, they were war horses, and the equipment that they find supports the fact that they were here as that type of horse. Again, there were very few at that period.
And those great horses were trained in what we call haute école. If anyone is familiar with the lipizzans that they see performing, those movements that you see the lipizzans performing are known as dressage, airs above the ground, and those movements all developed in military history. The leaping in the air and kicking out with the hind feet is so you could kick the enemy.
But then the Great Massacre of 1622 reshaped things, and the colony, the legislature of the colony became very concerned of defending themselves for their continued growth and expansion of the colony. So by that period, you start to see the landed gentry start to have horses, and horses are beginning to be used for transportation as well as for fighting platforms. Something else of interest happened in the colonies. There was a second massacre in 1644, and because of that, there was major legislation passed that required changes in how the colony was administered. One major change was that roads would be built between the different settlements. It was the beginning of the road structure that we use today. Up until that time, almost all the transportation was by water, but it became very important to have roads so that the militia could move to points where there were threats to the settlers. Also at this time, we know that they began to organize units of cavalry within the militia. So there must have been quite a growth in the amount of horses available. The English Civil War in the 1650s had a huge impact on how horses were used militarily. And it began the development of light cavalry. It also began an interesting pastime for the colonists, which was fox hunting, because the civil wars in England broke up a lot of the big estates and opened the land to the more common men came in and they hunted out the red deer and the boar. So the gentlemen, when they regained control of the country, needed something to hunt, so they began fox hunting. In late 17th century, you begin to see archaeology, a huge shift in the design as the colonists really get into horse racing. And we have the development of the quarter horse and this passion for the thoroughbred horse that by the late 1690s, shipping records indicate that coming out of the ports in Glasgow, Scotland, being shipped to the United States or the colonies, over 10,000 sets of horse equipment. Saddles and bridles were coming in by the 1690s. Virginia became a major center for the thoroughbred horse and horse breeding and quarter horse racing.
Horse racing was something that was taken up immediately. The first horse races would take place for a short distance because there wasn't enough clear ground in the 17th century. And they would have about a quarter mile, and there would be generally a post and rail fence of some sort, generally a barrier between the two horses. They were match races, and these horses were being bred and developed for these short distances. It was a gentleman's sport. Generally, the race horses were ridden by their grooms or their slaves, not the gentlemen themselves, though in some cases they did. So racing certainly was known as a sport of kings.
Just a significant impact all of that really had on Virginia and the colony in this area.
Thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you guys again next week. Bye-bye.